What's going on, guys? Welcome to episode 2 of painting this bumper Rustoleum paint job. If you have not seen part 1 where we go ahead and sand and primer this bumper, go ahead, watch that video first. But in this video, we're going to put a guide coat on the primer, sand it down nice and smooth, and lay down that beautiful yellow paint. So keep watching. So the other day I was driving down the street around my neighborhood and I saw more pieces that I could possibly take and practice painting on the sidewalk. I'll show you the picture right now. You guys think I could take that whole piece and practice painting on it? I mean, it was on the sidewalk. I could probably take it, right? We got some generic spray paint right over here, just basic black. And this is gonna be used as a guide coat. And what I mean by that is we're just gonna spray this paint lightly all over the bumper and give us a nice area to sand. And we're gonna know where we sanded and where we didn't. The main purpose of a guide coat is to make sure your finish is nice and smooth and you can see the high spots and the low spots when you're sanding, because those high and low spots, once you put the nice gloss paint on, are really going to show. So we're going to attempt to smooth this out. Even though this primer is fairly smooth, it's not that rough. Some people that lay primer, if you lay it too lightly, you'll get these rough spots, but this is pretty smooth. Honestly, I probably could have just painted over this when it was still tacky originally when I was painting, but because we had the high moisture in the air, high humidity, and it was raining, I decided not to do it. So this is what you got to do. So let's get started. Okay, well, this is junk. Let's go with the second one. Alright guys, and the paint job is complete. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Alright, so this is how it's gonna look like once you put the guide coat on. Guide coat can be pretty much any color you want. Just make sure it is paint, it is not a primer that you're spraying. And once you got this laid down, we're gonna be taking our 500 grit sandpaper with a sponge and we're gonna wet sand the whole bumper again. Once we finish wet sanding it, we're gonna take our scuff pad once again and make sure we get all the edges so the paint can stick perfectly on here. The reason I'm using this sponge is because the sponge is gonna be able to contour to the body lines a lot better than a standard sanding block. Sanding blocks are thick and flat and straight, and they won't be able to contour to the bumper's body lines. That's probably the best reason to use a sponge. You can also use your hand and the sandpaper, but your hand won't apply the pressure evenly, so you might make the surface not as even. Alright guys, so let's get started. And it is the first thing in the morning right now, and it is a little chilly, but it should shape up and become around 65-70 degrees later on, so that'll be perfect. Hopefully we're ready at that time to paint. So right here, for example, is a low spot. There's more black paint on the bumper that we weren't able to sand off, so that's a little low spot right here. So we'll just put a little bit more attention here, sand it a little bit more, and we'll continue this process throughout the whole bumper. But right now, this surface just got really smooth, which I like. Alright, at this point, everything has been sanded down, and when I tell you, when I ride my hand across this paint, everything is so nice and smooth and even. So as far as the guide coat, I know they use guide coats a lot when you're actually working on flat surfaces, putting Bondo on the surface or trying to get that level accurate as possible. As far as a bumper like this, I'm not sure if you necessarily need a guide coat, because You know, as you can see, there's still some low spots, some high spots, but when I ride my hand across this, it is so smooth. So I'm really happy with this. I'm not sure if I was using that guide coat appropriately. I did sand across these areas, but I still want to scuff them just to make sure we get nice adhesion later when we paint it. Alright guys, at this point we are pretty much done, and right here you can see that deep scratch. You see how it's a nice dark line? That's what I mean when the guide coat fills the low spot. So this I can actually feel with my hand, but everywhere else it is silky smooth. So I was not gonna go through the whole guide coat all over there. I wasn't gonna sand the whole thing. I did sand the guide coat a little bit more over here to remove everything. I'm curious to see if there's going to be any difference on this little area where I sanded all the guide coat, or this area where I made sure it's smooth but there's still guide coat on the area. So I'm curious to see if that's going to make a difference. But this is pretty much all sanded down. So let's go ahead, clean the garage up again. Everything is back in the garage, big mess. So we're going to have to remove a lot of things. We're going to have to clean the floor again, blow dry this out, set up the fans, and then we'll be ready to go. Alright, so we cleaned out the garage. Right now we're just gonna hose it down. Here you guys can see the overspray from the primer, not too bad at all. And one thing I wanted to show you guys, last time I was spraying the solvent, I sprayed some of that solvent right on this styrofoam when I was cleaning the gun, and look what happens. Just goes to show you how hazardous those chemicals are. I'm gonna wet the floor right now, and we're gonna try to maintain this floor to be wet throughout the whole procedure. Keep that dust down. There is something in the air from the trees, like that white little, I don't know if those are seeds or whatever you want to call them. They are coming out from the trees, so I got to be extra careful not to get any of that on the paint, not to contaminate it, to keep it clean. Just get the whole perimeter wet. You gonna paint? You ready to paint? All right. So always guys, make sure your dog is well hydrated as well. Alright guys, and the first step in cleaning this bumper before any wax and grease remover is just take some Dawn dish soap and a microfiber cloth or towel or rag and just clean it the old-fashioned way. This is going to remove a lot of contamination, believe it or not, and I highly recommend you do this. Don't just skip this process and go to wax and grease remover, because there is a ton of dirt still on the panel from all the sanding dust. Alright, there's a few things I wanted to say before we continue with this video. First off, the first day I was doing this, it was a very stressful process, very tedious. First time doing it, you know, everything's slower, everything takes longer. As you guys know, my water oil filter separator broke. I did email the eBay seller, and he is going to be sending me a new kit, and that kit includes the new filter and that new gauge. Another thing I noticed on the gauge is this gauge is not reading accurately. Right now it is reading about 6 psi, 5-6 psi. So remember, we were shooting around 27, 28 psi. Well, really we were shooting at, okay, here comes the dogs, all the dogs are barking. We were shooting probably at around 22 to 23 psi. So this time we're gonna make sure we bump this psi up a little bit more on the gauge, so we're actually shooting at around that 27, 8, 29 psi range. And I also, you know, I hated these filters from Harbor Freights. Sam Crack used them and a lot of YouTubers use them, but they suck because they always crack. And I thought using this filter would be of higher quality, but again, the first time using it, this thing cracked. So I'm pretty sure these things are gonna go bad too. But hey, we gotta paint this bumper, and by the time I get this from China, it's gonna be a month. So we went out, picked these up. Hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers, these work pretty good and don't break on me during the procedure, but I got two just in case. Alright guys, so that's the new gun setup. Hopefully it holds. We're gonna aim to shoot at around, on the gauge, based off the gauge, we're gonna shoot around 35 psi, so that should bring us down roughly to the correct area. All right, guys, the sunshine is out. Beautiful day turning out to be. We have the bumper here again in the sunshine. Nice and scuffed. I already washed it. So we're gonna start setting up the garage now. The compressor, I already bled it 3 times, so majority of the water should be gone from there. We're gonna set this up right over here. All right, first things first, we're gonna run some acetone through the gun just to make sure everything is nice and clean inside before we apply the paint. One other recommendation that I have for you guys is have a gun stand. See, I don't have a gun stand. I'm kind of ghetto rigging it by just kind of mocking it up in certain areas. This works for me. The most important thing I noticed, try not to bend this area right over here, because that's probably how the last filter cracked. So I'm gonna try to be extra careful right with this area. Hopefully I don't tug on this hose extension so it won't crack anything. But we got the gun set up. We're running about roughly 35 pounds on the gauge, but again the gauge is not accurate, so we're still aiming for 27, 28, 29 pounds. This is the current temperature, 69.7, 34 degrees. So let's go ahead and clean this gun out, air it out outside. See how fast it evaporates? I'm just adjusting the control here, making sure my fan pattern is wide open. And I'm gonna make sure my tip is wide open as well here. Get as much fluid as I can out of the gun. Make sure you guys shake these things up really well. If you are buying the paint the same day you are painting, and if you are at the hardware store, have them actually shake this up in the paint shaker. It's gonna make things a hell of a lot easier to make sure you mix all the contamination that's inside at the bottom of the paint can. Otherwise, if you're doing it like me, keep shaking at home. Look at that, that looks great, man. So we're gonna mix it up real quick with the paint stir, and by real quick I mean for at least 5 minutes, because I can already feel, putting the stick on the bottom of the can, there's a lot of stuff sitting there. So you want to make sure you mix that all in really well in the paint, so later on the color can be more consistent, the oils are thoroughly mixed. And for this mixture, I am probably going to be running about 10 ounces of paint, and then I'm going to do 4 ounces of acetone paint solvent thinner. It's just a guesstimate. A lot of people run 50-50 dilution with Rustoleum and 50% acetone or mineral spirits. This is just what I'm going for. I'm going something, I don't want to dilute it that much like most people are diluting it. And I think we'll be fine, because the primer sprayed down pretty good with a similar combination. Now, how do you know you only want 10 ounces for what you're spraying? I'm going to show you guys a guide right now overlaying this video, and it gives you an estimate of how many fluid ounces you want of paint for a body panel. So when I came across this, it says this is the amount I need for a bumper, so that's what we go with. Otherwise, you really don't know how much paint you need, and you don't want to mix too much paint for something, because then you're gonna have to waste that paint, throw it away, and that's just a waste of money. One little tip you guys can do is take some masking tape and just tape off these little edges here. So once you pour the paint, it's not gonna come out pouring all over the canister, and you're just gonna get a much smoother pour. You're gonna save that material in the can and not just pour it all over where you don't want it to go. And that should do the trick. We already mixed it for a good 5 minutes, so it's time to start pouring this. Get it in the gun, hose down the floor one more time, get ready to go. So let's look at 10 ounces. Look how beautifully that is pouring. Now you want to take your acetone and make sure we go up to 14. You can also add hardener to this mixture if you wanted to. This would make sure this hardens a lot better, that the finish would be more durable, more scratch resistant. This is something that you should consider doing if you are going to be spraying on a vehicle, because it's going to last much longer, provide much more protection. Well, that looks delicious. Paint is really well mixed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds before it stopped. I'm sure this has something to do with it, but I'm pretty happy with the consistency. Alright guys, so make sure you use your strainer when you pour the paint into the gun. Make sure it filters out any other contamination that might be left. We spilled a little bit there. Alright guys, now we have the gun ready. Always make sure that the lid of this is perfectly sealed. Sometimes people accidentally don't seal it all the way, and then when they start painting, all this paint just flops out and ruins their perfectly prepped finish. Double check that the seal is nice and tight and sealed. Alright guys, now it's time to close down the garage door, start prepping, wax and grease removing, tack clothing the bumper, and then we're ready to start spraying. So let's not waste any more time. Pretty clean, not like the last time you saw it. You guys remember how dirty that rag was. Alright, that's the first coat, but as you notice, there's no ventilation. I forgot to turn on the fans. Alright guys, first coat went on pretty smooth. Compared to the primer, this I made sure I went slower, and it did go on thicker that first coat, but it's all good. I didn't see any runs, and hell, I think this is gonna come out looking real good. I'm just debating whether or not I'm gonna tack cloth it between coats, because I know if this was just a regular base coat, like a real automotive dual stage paint, I would probably tack cloth it between base coats, but because this has gloss in it and no hardener and it's going to take forever to dry, I don't think I'm going to tack rack it at all anymore. So let's see what happens. Alright guys, we're going to start the second coat right now. We gave it about 25 to 35 minutes of dry time. After all, it turned out I sprayed it a little thick, thicker than I would like it. So I don't know if it's because we changed the air pressure on the gun or if this mixing ratio is a little different. There's no runs in the paint, but in order to prevent any leaks in the gun, I actually pulled the fluid tip a little bit closer in to restrict some of that flow. I'm keeping the PSI the same, and we'll see how she lays down for the second coat. Also, a lot of dust today, a lot of dirt. I'm trying to keep everything wet down below, but we'll see how it goes. Worst case scenario, we'll buff out the imperfections later on. Oh well.
I got my fans going on this time though.
All right, second coat is done. All right, so we got some particles that just stuck onto the paint right now. I'm gonna try to show you guys. I don't know if you can see it. Right there, there's a particle there. So I'm gonna wait till it dries a little bit more, and then I'm gonna attempt to maybe try to get rid of that. Second coat came out a lot nicer. The paint didn't go on as thick. So whatever I did with that adjustment knob did work. First things first, definitely we are not using the tack cloth. The paint comes out really tacky and sticky to the touch, so if we apply that tack cloth, we are gonna screw up that finish. So no more of that. We're not gonna do that. Probably because this is an oil-based paint, it stays tacky. The primer laid down a lot differently, and it dried really quickly after each application. About 10 minutes, it was bone dried to the touch. This, I'm giving it about 30 minutes between coats, and again, it's low humidity. It's about 70 degrees, so the painting conditions are ideal, but maybe it's just because of how Rustoleum oil paint is. Again, this is not ideal solution to paint automotive finishes, so that's something you have to consider. Now the next thing is, because I have to wait 30 minutes between each coat, there is a lot of dirt and debris that's falling into the paint. We are trying to avoid it as much as we can, but that's just part of the drawbacks of painting at home in the garage, not in a professional paint booth where everything is sealed, ventilated, filtered. So the third coat, I'm going to try to give you guys a point of view with the phone. Fourth coat, again, I'm going to go a little bit thicker. Fifth coat, I'm going to go a little bit thicker and try to accumulate that nice glossy one-piece glass-like finish. Third coat, again, a light coat. We made sure all the areas are covered. I don't see any white or black guide coat anymore, so for the most part it's uniform. Now the fourth coat, I'm gonna really go slow, make sure we accumulate a good amount of paint on the surface, because right now if we do thin coats, you still got this choppy looking surface, whereas if we apply more thicker layers, that paint accumulates as a layer itself and it creates that smooth glass-like finish. So fourth coat, we're gonna go for that glass-like finish real slow, a lot thicker. We'll probably follow up with a fifth coat, and that should be it.
So far, the gun has been holding up really good. There's no problems with the filter here. Nothing. I love it. So let's do some thick coats right now. I'm gonna try to record for you guys again.
Before we do the last coat here, I just wanted to show you guys how well this is filtering out. All the paint is getting absorbed by this. So if you don't have a respirator and you're trying to paint, do yourself a favor and just buy yourself one of these. Look at the fans also. All right, so it's been drying again about 30 minutes. We went pretty much two in one coat on the last pass, and it's finally starting to slick in. As you can see, a lot of debris is definitely accumulating, but that's okay. Once we start the wet sanding process later, once this fully dries and cures, we'll be able to remove a lot of that. But that slickness is what we were looking for once we started going with the heavy. So we don't have much paint left either, so hopefully this paint is gonna last us enough to do this last heavy coat, and we'll call it a day.
We ran out of paint. No more paint. It's gone. Empty.
Alright guys, man, we ran out of paint on the last pass. I think it was the fifth coat. Terrible. I was hoping that wouldn't happen, and it did happen. So real quickly we just stirred everything up. My ratio probably wasn't as accurate as the previous ratio, just because I was in a time constraint. We wanted to lay it down again, but everything came out pretty good. Obviously there is dirt and debris in the paint. Sucks, probably because of that long wait time between coats. That's not going to be an issue when we start buffing the bumper in the next coming week. We're gonna let this paint cure completely, make sure it is nice and dry, and then we're gonna start compounding it and we're gonna make it look like a mirror. And guys, if you are enjoying any of these videos, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to this channel to follow what else we got in store. And if you guys are enjoying this Rustoleum project, let me know what kind of Rustoleum project you had, what you painted, and what your dilutions rate were, and how did it come out.
I ain't here for the money, I ain't here for the fame. Though it might be nice to own a jet plane, I'ma do it all for you. Come along and see it's true, but the world is pretty cold. You might need a sweater too. I'ma put a ride on ya, kid from California, trying to make it in life. In school they never taught ya. Dreams